He knew the blade was already in the air the moment he leaned against my cubicle wall, like he owned the oxygen around us. New VP, immaculate suit. The kind of white that only comes from someone who's never had a bonus denied or a quarter go sideways. Sweetheart, he said, because of course he did. Your handshake diplomacy approach, adorable, but we're pivoting toward a more scalable model. Translation: you're out, and I'm going to smile while I do it so you mistake condescension for praise. 10 minutes later, I was sitting inside a glass-walled fishbowl with HR. Staring down at a severance packet, they slid across the table like a greeting card. My badge was deactivated before the ink on my signature had time to dry. They handed me a branded tote bag, logos stamped loud and proud, as if corporate swag could somehow soften the reality that they'd just gutted 37 enterprise accounts with one lazy stroke of a pen. As I passed my desk for the final time, I let my fingers graze the spine of my dog-eared lighthouse binder. That binder had survived 2 recessions, a pandemic, and more red-eye flights than my optometrist ever wanted to hear about. Inside it lived 15 years of relationship maps, renewal playbooks, and the kind of client trust you'll never find logged inside Salesforce. The same binder he'd just labeled replaceable. 3 of those accounts. My alias had key person writers written directly into their contract. My name spelled out in clean black ink. No me, no deal. The VP hadn't even blinked. Somewhere inside that buzzword puree brain of his, he genuinely believed touchpoints could replace a 6 a.m. coffee with a client whose kid's science fair project you'd personally sponsored. On my monitor sat a yellow sticky note that had been there for years. Check section 12. He'd written it during a late-night contract review after another executive tried to cut me out of a deal I'd personally closed. That clause was my quiet insurance policy, the one I'd fought tooth and nail for in a conference room no one remembered anymore. He smiled when I saw it, because I already knew this was about to get interesting. And before I go on, apparently 97% of you are listening to stories like this without hitting subscribe. Come on. It's free, and it keeps my team bringing you these corporate train wrecks with extra butter. They think silence means surrender. Silence actually means I'm counting the days until renewal windows open, counting how long before the first termination notice lands, counting every mistake they make now that my accounts have been handed to someone whose idea of relationship management is a webinar with bad lighting. I didn't argue. I didn't even look back at the VP. He's the kind of man who thinks winning means hearing his own voice louder than everyone else. My win would be quieter, precise, measured, timed, until he's standing in a boardroom wondering why the air suddenly feels thin. So I walked out, heels clicking against tile, tote bag swinging at my side. The security guard gave me that half-sympathetic nod reserved for people who've just lost their jobs but didn't deserve it. Inside my head, I was already moving pieces. Dust off the lighthouse license agreements. Pull the last 3 years of whale revenue. Confirm every confidential file is backed up where it belongs, on my side of the fence. Because here's the thing about being replaceable, sweetheart. The people who say it never bother reading the fine print. And section 12? That isn't fine print. That's a loaded weapon with a hair trigger. And they'd just handed it to me. By the time my tote bag hit the passenger seat of my car, I already knew exactly how they'd botched the account transition. It wasn't intuition, it was pattern recognition, earned the hard way. Sure enough, 2 days later, confirmation arrived from an old friend still inside the building. The VP had unveiled his grand retention strategy, one all-hands webinar, and a barrage of mass emails that read like poorly disguised press releases. No personal calls, no remembering kids' names, no handwritten thank you notes after renewals. Just glossy PDFs and the hollow self-assurance of someone who thought engagement could be measured in click-through rates. Client hash. One was the first to blink. And by blink, I mean they sent a flawlessly polite, nuclear-grade email straight to the contract inbox. Per section 14.2, due to a change in key personnel, we are exercising our right to terminate for convenience, effective immediately. It was the kind of sentence that, if you've been around long enough, you can hear being read aloud in a lawyer's voice. Less farewell, more obituary for the VP's career lifespan. I laughed, not out of joy. More the gallows humor you get watching someone torch an entire barn just to swat a fly. That single account alone generated more annual revenue than his entire department's combined payroll. He'd spent 7 years building it brick by brick. Flew out for a last-minute dinner when their procurement officer's spouse got sick. Sat through a 3-hour opera in a city I still can't pronounce just to close a renewal gap pot. And now it was gone in the time it took them to click send. So I baked a pie. Peach bourbon, my grandmother's recipe. When it cooled, I piped cost of doing business across the top in whipped cream and snapped a photo. He briefly considered mailing it to the office, but decided the joke was better enjoyed privately. Some things are more satisfying when they stay unsent. Here's the part they never understood. Those key person riders weren't freebies handed down by legal. I negotiated every single one myself. Dragged counsel into calls they resented, outlasted procurement teams until they folded. Those clauses are rare for a reason. Companies hate being contractually tethered to an actual human being. But my whales demanded them because they knew exactly what they were buying. Not a service. Me. Back in the day, I kept renewal dates written on a wall calendar in my cubicle, circled thick in red Sharpie. Half talisman, half scoreboard. That calendar hangs in my home office now, and I can see the future written in looping handwriting. Client hash 2. Renewal notice in 9 days. Client hash 3:15. I didn't need to make a single call. The clock was doing the work for me. I could practically picture the VP in his corner office, swiveling his ergonomic chair toward the window while explaining to the CEO that some churn is normal during leadership transitions. That's what amateurs call losing customers. They assumed were captive. Professionals like me, we call it a slow bleed. And this was only the first drop. That night, I opened my archived files and reread the riders, clean, tight, bulletproof. He drafted them to survive more than bad leadership. I drafted them to survive leadership arrogant enough to believe it wasn't the problem. The whales didn't need outreach from me. They already knew the rules. My departure wasn't a hiccup, it was a tripwire. 3 days later, my personal phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was familiar, warm, calm, layered with meaning. Hey, just checking in. Are you okay? It wasn't a question about my well-being. It was a probe. A courtesy knock to see if I was available. I smiled into the receiver. The bleed had officially begun, and nothing terrifies management more than realizing a wound isn't going to clot. 9 days after client hash 1 walked, client hash 2 delivered their own farewell. No emotion, no cushioning language. Just a clean, surgical notice dropped into legal's inbox, pursuant to Section 11p. Termination effective, immediately due to key person change. They didn't ask a single question about transition planning because they already knew the answer. There wasn't one. That account had been mine since day one. It convinced their CFO to renew during the 2009 downturn by shipping him a care package, bourbon, and the exact brand of cigars he smoked at his wedding. I remembered because relationships live in details. Now the entire deal evaporated into the legal ether with a single click. Client hash 3 didn't even bother waiting for their renewal window. 4 days later, their termination notice landed with a timestamp hovering right before lunch. I could picture the paralegal reading it over a turkey sandwich, chewing slowly, while another 7-figure account disappeared. Same clause. Same rationale, same signature block. All the VP had to show for it was a webinar replay. No one made it past slide 4. Inside the company, things were unraveling fast. My friend in ops described it like watching a kitchen catch fire while the head chef insists the smell is normal. Leadership rolled out what they called a rapid response plan, code for endless meetings, where everyone debated messaging instead of addressing the root problem. Clients weren't buying services. They were buying me. That's when the real comedy began. An email landed from the CEO's assistant, someone who'd never spoken to me directly in all my years there. The subject line read, "Need your retention scripts, ASAP. No greeting, no hope you're well." Just the expectation that I'd immediately hand over the very thing I'd spent years protecting. They had no idea those scripts weren't company property. Every single year, without exception, I'd licensed them to the company for 12 months at a negotiated rate. That rate lived quietly inside an additional services clause, signed off by prior counsel, someone who actually read what they approved. The day they escorted me out was the exact day that the license expired. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled my own records, work logs, email threads, signed Lighthouse license addenda going back 10 years. Everyone stamped employee-originated methodology, licensed not assigned. My performance reviews supported it too. Her proprietary relationship framework resulted in X% of retention and Y% of upsell. They hadn't even tried to hide it. They'd just assumed proprietary meant company-owned by default. He spread the documents across my dining table like a general mapping terrain. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was preservation. You don't swing until every receipt, every signature, every timestamp is indexed and ready. Then my phone lit up. Caller ID, the company. He almost let it ring out, but curiosity won. The CEO didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Per your contract," he barked, "you're required to return immediately. We will pursue a compel performance action if necessary." His voice sounded like gravel and caffeine. The tone of a man who hadn't slept enough nights realizing had backed the wrong horse. I let him talk. Let him think he was issuing commands. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I didn't mention that Section 12 was sitting highlighted in my copy of the contract like a pressure plate. Instead, I gave him something unexpected. "Fine, I said calmly. Let's read the contract together. The silence on the other end wasn't confusion. It was the faint awareness of someone stepping onto ice without realizing how thin it already was. The calendar invite arrived minutes later. Emergency strategy session, mandatory attendance. I accepted without comment and replied with one sentence. Please confirm counsel will be present. There was no universe where I walked back into that boardroom without someone whose job it was to read the same words I was about to hand them. That morning, I dressed the way I always do when I intend to go to war but look like I'm heading to brunch. Neutral silk blouse, navy blazer, no jewelry except my wedding band. He carried 2 items, a slim leather folio containing 3 pristine copies of my employment agreement, and a separate folder labeled in thick black marker, Lighthouse License Agreements. Complete. The folio was theater. The folder was the weapon. When I stepped into the boardroom, the temperature felt artificially cold, the way Havok always does. In rooms where people make catastrophic decisions, they hope to blame on someone else. The CEO sat at the head of the table, tie slightly off-center, coffee in a paper cup instead of his usual stainless tumbler. Small tells, always telling. The VP was there too, leaning back with that smug half-grin that says, "This is a formality, and you're about to fall in line." HR sat off to the side, lips pressed tight, shuffling papers no one needed shuffled. Every few seconds, the HR director cleared her throat. A sounded long ago, learned translated to "we screwed up, and I know it." The CEO opened with bluster, throwing around words like breach, obligation, critical operational need, projecting like volume could bend reality. The VP nodded along, as if his agreement still carried weight. When the CEO paused to breathe, I placed my folio on the table, unzipped it slowly, and slid a copy of my employment agreement to him. One to counsel, one to HR. "Let's read it together," I said evenly. I reached into my blazer and placed 2 yellow flags on the pages, one marking Section 12, the other Exhibit D, employee-originated accounts. I didn't explain them. I didn't need to. The general counsel adjusted his glasses and began reading. At first, his eyes moved fast, the way people skim when they're convinced they already know what's coming. But then his pen, which had been tapping lazily against the table, slowed, then stopped. His lips began moving without sound, as if he were rereading the same sentence, just to confirm it hadn't rearranged itself out of spite. He glanced at Exhibit D, then back to Section 12, then up at me. The expression on his face shifted, no longer neutral, no longer bored. The VP's smirk flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. HR had stopped shuffling papers entirely. "You want to be very clear," I said calmly. Section 12 was negotiated after prior leadership attempted to reassign my accounts without acknowledgement or credit. It specifies exactly what happens when the company terminates me without cause and then tries to compel continued service. It tapped the yellow flag on Exhibit D, and Exhibit D defines which accounts are considered employer-originated. Those are the same accounts you've been attempting to retain for the last 2 weeks, with no success. The CEO leaned back, as if distance from the document might somehow rewrite it. Counsel kept reading, slower now, each line carrying more weight than the last. He watched the realization take shape behind his glasses. The precise moment a lawyer understands his client didn't just make a mistake. They stepped into a mechanism designed to respond. I didn't rush him. Storms need space to gather. Finally, he placed his pen down and flattened his palm over section 12, like he was holding the words in place to stop them from escaping. Upon termination without cause, he read aloud, his voice steady but noticeably slower. 1. Non-compete and non-solicitation provisions dissolve with respect to employee-originated accounts. 2. Any attempt to compel service triggers a mandatory buyout equal to 2.5 times trailing 12-month revenue from those accounts. 3. Continued use of lighthouse materials post-termination without license constitutes willful infringement with mandatory fee shifting. He stopped, adjusted his glasses again, read it silently one more time. I could see it moving through him. Curiosity, disbelief, and then that quiet, resigned acceptance lawyers get when they realize the other side isn't just holding a strong hand. They're holding the whole deck. The VP let out a short, dismissive laugh. "That's overly generous language," he muttered. "It wouldn't hold up." Counsel didn't even look at him. Instead, he turned to Harry. His voice dropped just enough that everyone leaned in. "Did you terminate her without cause?" HR hesitated, shifted in her chair, looked at the CEO, then down at the table. She didn't need to answer. The silence did it for her. The CEO broke it by flipping pages as if searching for a loophole that didn't exist. The math was already assembling itself inside counsel's head. 3 whale accounts, trailing 12-month revenue in the high 7 figures, multiplied by 2.5. Odd statutory damages for willful IP infringement if Lighthouse had been touched since my license expired. Those are the kinds of numbers that don't stay contained in conference rooms. They migrate to board calls, to shareholder meetings, to whispered questions about leadership competence. I sat still and let the weight settle. The VP glanced at me again, maybe hoping I'd blink, soften, offer an exit ramp. I didn't. I wasn't here to argue or negotiate emotionally. He was here to watch them read their own signatures and finally understand what I'd agreed to. The room went quiet, too quiet. That awkward pause where everyone waits to see who speaks next without admitting they're the one cornered. Finally, counsel broke the silence. "Finance," he said, turning his head slightly. "Pull the trailing 12-month revenue for the employee-originated accounts listed in Exhibit D now." A junior analyst in a navy suit slipped out of the room, laptop already open, moving like someone who knew this wasn't hypothetical. This was live ammunition. 10 minutes later, he returned, pale, whispering figures into the CFO's ear. The CFO didn't bother hiding the way his shoulders dropped. The total was announced aloud. High 7 figures in revenue, multiplied by 2.5 per section 12. The number didn't land. It collapsed the room. Ops made it worse. We used her lighthouse scripts last week," one manager admitted, hesitant, like a kid confessing to a broken window and hoping no one noticed. Every head turned toward me. I reached into my folder and slid a single-page document across the table. The most recent Lighthouse license agreement. Expiration date circled. The exact day they walked me out. No renewal invoice paid, no extension signed, I said quietly, which means every use after that date qualifies as willful infringement. From my bag, I pulled access logs. "You have security alerts for post-termination access," I added. "Here's your login history, timestamps eeps user exists. I kept my voice low, controlled. Eve learned that when you speak softly in rooms full of men who believe volume equals authority, they lean in. And when they lean in, they listen. The CFO scanned the logs, his pen clicking faster. Counsel took the page from him, read it once, then placed it face down, as if the paper itself might burn. The CEO rubbed his temple. The VP stared straight ahead, smirk gone, eyes hollow. I let the silence breathe. Then I opened my folio and placed 2 envelopes on the table, side by side, neatly labeled. Option A, Option B. I slid them forward, like the final move in a card game. Option A. I began, my voice steady, almost courteous. You retain me as an independent consultant. $900 an hour, 200-hour minimum, paid in ads. He paused just long enough for the number to register. The VP resents effective immediately. A public apology is issued correcting the role misclassification, and the Lighthouse license is reinstated for 12 months, at triple the previous rate. Then I tapped the second envelope. Option B, I decline. You join a competitor who already has agreements drafted for my 3 whales. You wire the mandatory buyout under Section 12, plus infringement damages, by Friday at 5 p.m. My tone never shifted. This wasn't anger anymore. It was arithmetic with teeth. He rested my fingertips lightly on the envelopes, hovering the way a card shark does over a winning hand. You can open them now, I said, or you can open them later. The clock runs either way. Option A was an escape hatch, narrow, humiliating, but survivable. Option B was clean and catastrophic. He watched the CFO glance at the thicker envelope and then look away, like prolonged eye contact might summon it into action. The VP finally snapped. This is extortion, he barked, voice too loud, posture inflated. The Lighthouse methodology is company property. You built it here. He didn't interrupt him. I didn't need to. I turned slowly toward counsel. He opened the contract, flipped to Exhibit D, and read aloud, voice clipped and precise. The Lighthouse proprietary methodology licensed annually by mutual agreement. Ownership remains with the employee-originated account holder. He closed the binder with a quiet thud and looked directly at the VP. It's not yours. The words landed like a gavel. The VP tried again, but counsel cut him off without even raising his voice. Continued use of the materials without a current license constitutes willful infringement. He glanced at me. You have access logs. He slid them over. The timestamps sat on the table like fingerprints at a crime scene. Counsel nodded once, already recalculating the damage figure in his head. He smiled then, not warmly, not cruelly, but sharply, like a light flicking on in a blackout. I remembered that the darkness was no accident. Choose carefully, I said. The clock is already halfway through its last tick. The VP leaned forward again, desperation dressing itself up as confidence. Lighthouse belongs to the company, he insisted. It was developed with our resources. Counsel didn't sigh. He simply turned the pages again, slower this time, and reread the same line aloud. Then he closed the binder and looked at the VP like a teacher watching a student fail an open book exam. The CEO's hand was shaking now, not from rage, but realization. HR finally spoke, barely audible. We used her scripts. Her eyes darted to Counsel, then to me, as if hoping one of us would say it didn't matter. Counsel didn't, he muttered. Oh my God, under his breath. Not as a curse, as a calculation. The damages had just multiplied. I felt nothing surge. No triumph, no vindication rush. Just a clean, cold calm. This wasn't personal. These were line items. I laid 2 more documents on the table. Board minutes from 3 years ago, identifying Lighthouse as a third-party methodology licensed from me. And the original origin memo, signed, witnessed, unmistakable, anchors. Documents that kept the truth from drifting anywhere convenient. The VP went quiet. The CEO leaned back, like a man trying to imagine a locked room suddenly having walls. I wrote the invoice in silence. Buyout amount under Section 27. Infringement fees per unauthorized use. The total circled in ink, dark enough to bleed through the page. Deadline written clean at the bottom. Friday, 5:00 p.m. I slid it across the table. No speech, no flourish, just math and a date. He leaned in, one fingertip resting on the clause the CEO had tried to weaponize days earlier. This is the line you thought would force me back, I said softly. What it actually does is dissolve every restriction tied to my accounts and trigger the buyout the moment you tried. Counsel nodded once. Final. The CEO swallowed. What would it take to make this go away? I didn't hesitate. I tapped the thicker envelope. That one. No one reached for it. They didn't have to. The whales didn't choose your logo, I said, standing. They chose me, and my rival's welcome packet is already in my car. The VP opened his mouth one last time, but the CEO caught sight of the circled total and cut him off. Close it. I left the invoice on the table, left the silence with it, left him staring at a number no pep talk could erase. By the time the wire hit my account, my old badge wouldn't open the lobby turnstile anymore, and my calendar would already be full. Big thanks for listening. Subscribe if you like your corporate revenge slow, precise, and fully invoiced.